Hi, in this video I'm taking a look at the Bach chorale that we began to analyze in class on Monday and working through the analysis of the rest of the piece. If you haven't done the homework already, definitely do the homework first before watching this video because otherwise you won't get much benefit out of it. So do the homework, then you can take a look at this video and see if you arrived at the same interpretation of the piece that I did. All right, let's start out by taking a listen to this chorale. I wanted to start out by going over the 4 bars that we analyzed in class. It starts out with a 1 chord that then moves to a chord that we can understand as a 6 chord at E minor if we're looking at this C as the non-chord tone. We could also hear that as a 4 chord in first inversion if we interpret that B as the non-chord tone, as an accented non-chord tone. And that ambiguity, as we talked about in class, comes in handy a little bit later. That moves to a 5 chord here, to a 1 on the downbeat of the third beat. And then on the upbeat of the third beat, we have our first applied chord, our first secondary dominant. Now you can guess that it is some sort of a secondary dominant because you can see that it's chromatic. It requires an accidental. The accidental is the C sharp, which in the key of G is scale degree sharp 4. Sharp 4 is the leading tone of the key of the 5 chord. So 5 in G is of course D, and C sharp is the leading tone in the key of D. So we have a secondary dominant, a 5 of 5, and because we have the G in the bass carried over from the first half of the beat, we have the 7th of this A7 chord in the bass, making it a third inversion of 4-2. So 5-4-2 of 5, moving to a first inversion 5 chord, and then that first inversion 5 chord turns into a second inversion 5 chord, a 5-6-4. What's interesting about that is it sets up a cadential 6-4 motion tonicizing 5, tonicizing the key of D. So this looks a lot like a 1-6-4-5-7-1 in the key of D, and that is the key of the dominant in the home key of G. So 5-6-4, 5-7 of 5, another secondary dominant, moving to 5. And so we have a strong half cadence here on the 5, closing out this antecedent phrase. And then that is followed by a new secondary dominant, a new chromatic chord. This one introduces the chromatic pitch sharp 5, and that should be a red flag. That's the leading tone of 6, which is E, E minor in the key of G. So we have a 5-6-5 because it has the third of the chord in the bass. We have a 5-6-5 of 6. We're expecting that to move to 6, but instead we get a deceptive cadence and it moves to 4 in the home key. It moves to C major. This takes advantage of the ambiguity that's set out in the second chord of the chorale, where this chord, as I mentioned just a minute ago, could be interpreted as a 6 chord or a 4 chord, depending on which of these two notes you're thinking of as your chord tone and which of these two notes you're thinking of as your non-chord tone. So now we've got a 4 chord, and that should actually be a 4-6, I'm realizing, because that's in first inversion. It moves to a 1, and then back to a 4, to a 5-4-2 that then moves through a 1 to a cadential 1-6-4, closing out the consequent phrase of this first section with a 1-6-4-5-7-1. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like. Now, the things that I want you to listen to in particular are the way that this half cadence is set up to sound like a perfect authentic cadence in the key of the dominant. And then I also want you to hear this deceptive motion where we introduce this chromatic chord, this secondary dominant that has a strong inclination moving us in the direction of 6, but then that movement is immediately thwarted and we go in a different direction altogether to the closely related key, to the 4. Let's take a listen. Now, let's talk about what happens in the rest of the piece. We go into some really interesting harmonic terrain. Starts out with a move to the dominant. Nothing too surprising there. But then, and then it moves through some passing motion, continues the dominant, some more passing motion. This could be heard as a 2-6 chord, an A minor chord in first inversion, but it's very much a passing chord. We might expect this 5 to resolve to 1, but instead of arriving at 1, we get this chord where scale degree 1 is actually chromatically altered. It's a sharp 1. And so it's a chromatic pitch. It indicates, because G sharp is the leading tone of A, the 2 chord, scale degree sharp 1 indicates that we might be tonicizing the key of 2. So this is a dominant in the key of A minor. It is a first inversion 7 chord, and it does move to A minor, as we might expect. The chord that follows it is kind of interesting. It is a secondary dominant 7 chord, but if you look at this chromatic pitch, the D sharp, the raised scale degree 5, as you probably remember from over here, the raised scale degree 5 indicates that this is a secondary dominant of the 6 chord. Instead of resolving to the 6 chord, though, it resolves to the secondary dominant of 2. Now, the 6 chord is E minor in the key of G, right? And the secondary dominant of 2 is also an E chord. It's a E major chord, or E major chord with that minor 7th, the dominant 7th on it. So we have a type of deceptive motion, but also a type of very natural motion where the dominant of E does resolve to a type of E. It just resolves to an E chord that then acts as a dominant in the key of A minor. And so we have this nice suspension. I called this a 5-7 chord because the seventh of the chord is added at the very end in this passing motion. And that lands on a nice solid 2 chord, an A minor, and we have the shape of a perfect authentic cadence tonicizing 2. Then to move us back out of that tonal space, out of that key, we have the G natural again. We have the 6th chord, an E minor chord. The E minor chord is briefly tonicized itself with that D sharp. I didn't label the chord here, but this passing chord, passing motion in the bass, neighbor motion in that middle voice, giving us the leading tone of the 6th chord, the D sharp, could be read as a dominant, as a secondary dominant of 6. 6 continues, but then the E is raised again to the G is raised again to the G sharp, making this E chord into a secondary dominant of 2, and again we have this arrival at A minor chord. In beat 4, it's followed by a chord that I'll come back to. When you listen to the track, you can hear that there's a sort of harmonic complexity, harmonic surprise happening in this moment. It moves us to a place where we can have, once again, a sort of authentic cadence motion tonicizing now the 6th chord. Once again, we have this secondary dominant of 6 with the chromatic pitch, the leading tone of 6, the sharp 5 in the upper voice. Now, I want to point out too that this arrival at a tonicization of 6 is actually something that was promised early on, right? In the first 4 bars, we have this secondary dominant of 6 that Bach thwarts by moving us back to the 4 chord, right? But then in the second part of the chorale, he follows through on that intention to tonicize 6, and 6 becomes a real arrival point, the end of the kind of chromatic exploration, the trip away from the home key, and having now arrived at this tonicization of 6, Bach begins to move back toward the home key of G. We have a 5 chord that resolves to a 1-6, that moves to a 1 through some passing motion in the bass. We have some very quick harmonic motion in here that extends that 1 chord. If we're thinking like about a second level analysis, it extends the tonic area by moving through a predominant, a dominant, and a tonic quite quickly. We have a very brief 6 chord here that then moves us to this extended 5 of 5 secondary dominant. And I think that a way that Bach sets us up to arrive at a strong cadence, to arrive at the end of this chorale, is by increasing the speed of the harmonic motion, and then slowing down the speed of the harmonic motion. So we get some very fast functional movement in here. Then we have 2 beats of just holding out this secondary dominant, this 5, 6, 5 of 5, and that arrives on a strong dominant. And now we move to tonic, but we know it's not the real final cadence because it is on a weak beat. So this dominant moves to tonic. Oh, that should have a inversion too. That's a first inversion, a 1/6 chord. I guess I hadn't put in all of my inversions here before I started shooting the video. To a 4 chord, to a 5/7, to a 4, to a 5/6/5, to a 1. Again, we have the predominant dominant tonic motion, but because it is landing on a weak beat, we still have this need to resolve it further, and so we get this predominant dominant tonic 2/6/5 5/1 motion closing out the piece. Okay, I wanted to go back and take a look at this chord here that I hadn't labeled. It might have brought up some confusion for folks, though it actually is very similar to what happens on beat 4 2 measures earlier here. Now, if you remember, this chord is a secondary dominant of 6, but instead of moving to 6 or E minor, it moves to the E chord that is the dominant of 2. So in some ways, this is actually 7 of 5 of 2. We have a similar thing happening here. This is a fully diminished 7th chord. And we know that a fully diminished 7th chord can operate as dominant. And this chord, which is a sharp diminished, that A sharp is the leading tone of B. So this could be analyzed as a 5/7, or sorry, this could be analyzed as a 7/7 of B or 7/7 of 3. So this would be the secondary dominant of the mediant of the 3 chord. But similarly to what happens in the preceding 2 bars, it doesn't resolve to a 3 chord, it resolves to a secondary dominant of the 6 chord. So the B that it resolves to, and it resolves through this cadential 1/6/4 motion, but the B chord that it resolves to is the 5/7 of 6, not a 3 chord, not a minor B chord. So this could be analyzed as a 7/7 of 3, but it doesn't move to 3, it moves to 5/7 of 6. These chords can also be understood as tertiary dominants rather than secondary dominants. They're not the dominant of, they're not functioning as the dominant of a chord in the key, they're functioning as the dominant of a chord in the key. And so that's another sort of applied chord that we're going to talk about. Let's take a listen to this second half of the piece, and then we can put it all together.